my entire life has been spent either at a furniture store, on the way to a furniture store, or talking about what just happened at the furniture store. This is a picture of me and my grandfather when I was about 5 years old in his furniture store. And at that point, I was already sick and tired of the furniture business. My mother and I every morning would wake up 6 days a week and make the 1-hour trip from Sanford, North Carolina to Raleigh so that she could work in his furniture store. And I was effectively free labor. Now, how many of you have had that experience? Let's take a quick poll. How many of you at some point in your life have been a part of family business? Okay, almost everyone. How many of you are currently involved in family business? Perfect. So here was my plan as a little 5-year-old. My only plan, my primary goal was to find a way to get a hold of Grandma so that she'd come get me. We go anywhere other than the furniture store. I didn't care where it was. Now, about 8 years later, a few years later, I was 8 years old. And my mother had achieved her goal of having her own furniture store. And so she had her own store, and I still had to be free labor. You know, yesterday Matt talked about pinnacle moments. I had a pinnacle moment when I was about 8 years old. And I can remember standing in the doorway of my parents' furniture store at 8 years old, standing in the doorway between the furniture showroom and our warehouse. And I can remember thinking, 10 more years. Just 10 more years, because in 10 more years, I would be 18, I would be graduating high school, and I would have my freedom. As a matter of fact, at that point in my life, as an 8-year-old standing in that doorway, I hated furniture and the business so much that I was committed that when I had a home of my own, it would have no furniture in it. I didn't live up to that commitment. However, 10 years came, 10 years went, quickly, as it does for most kids. The Saturdays of delivering after school, working in the store, I finally got my freedom. 10 years later, I graduated high school and I packed my things and I went to college. Far enough away where I could not possibly come home to work on the weekends. 4 years of college went fast. I had my freedom. I had met my childhood adolescent goal of being out of the furniture business. I graduated from college and promptly moved back home to take over the family business. That is when I began my journey to being the third and last generation of my family business. And you know, I see that it's not just me who's had an experience similar to that. And it's not just a localized problem. It's not just because my family was dysfunctional. Because I can tell you based on my experience that if you talk to your family, it's probably dysfunctional in some way. And business follows family relationships. And even outside of family, business follows relationships. I did a little research based on what the Wall Street Journal says is that 70% of first-generation businesses are not able to successfully transition to the second generation. 90% are not able to transition from 2 to 3. That's only 10%. And I thought, man, is this like because Americans just don't get it? Well, I found that it's not just an American issue. It's maybe even bigger than that. Here's what they say in China. Now, again, I'm from Sanford, North Carolina. I struggle with English. And so I'm not going to attempt that, but I'll tell you what it translates into. It translates into wealth never survives 3 generations. In Brazil, this is what they say. Another common saying. Rich father, noble son, poor grandson. In Italy, they say this. This translates from the stables to the stars, back to the stables. And how true that is so often. Mexico, they say this. Father merchant, son gentleman, grandson beggar. America, this is really the question we ask, right? How do I make a small fortune? That's the question we want to know. And I found that the answer is you got to start with a big one to end with a small one. You know, my big struggle oftentimes is that people say that retail is like a marathon. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that retail is more like a relay race. Because in a marathon, you get an opportunity to have some comfort in the beginning, and it doesn't hurt very bad. Well, that's not true in retail if you've ever started a business. How many of you are the founder of a company? You know that you don't get to start off at a slow pace, right? And I know, based on my experience being an owner of a retail company, that there was never a day that I got to go slow. Everything was fast. Everything was quick. Everything changed. We're dealing with this with digital today in the last panel. We're dealing with it in every single part of our business. Our customers are changing. We have new generations that are coming through the ranks that have different things that they want out of us as retailers. They expect different things. And I don't think it's as slow as maybe a marathon actually is. I think it's more like a relay race. And in a relay race, it's really important to note a couple of things. So the first thing to note in a relay race, and this is the Jamaicans beating the Americans when the Americans were favored to win. One thing that you'll notice is the Americans are in the lead until the third handoff of the baton, which I think is really interesting. And if you'll watch, the Americans are in the red, in the middle. The Jamaicans are trailing. Usain Bolt is the fourth runner. And if you'll notice right here, the handoff on the red team, the Americans, they struggle a little bit. One thing that I've noticed about family business, one thing I've noticed about retail, one thing I've noticed about corporate America is oftentimes it has nothing to do with the economy in terms of failure. The economy has very little to do with the failure in passing the baton. The competition has very little to do with whether you're going to be in business this year, you're going to be in business 10 years from now. The competition, the economy have very little to do. I believe that the primary reason why companies fail, whether that's divisionally in a big company or whether that's your family business, the reason why companies fail are the inability to appropriately hand off to the next person. Whether that's the next person in your leadership team, whether that's the next CEO, whether that's the next marketing director, whether that's the next social media strategist, the failure to hand off appropriately to the next generation, the next person, I believe is the primary reason we see failure inside of our industry. The bad news is this is a big problem, right? The good news is I believe this is a problem that can be easily fixed if we pay attention to it. Now, I've identified 5 bad handoffs that I'd like to share with you because I was really intrigued as I was doing some research. I was really intrigued by the power of the baton because the baton was really the thing that mattered the most. But it seemed to be the thing that for the teams that were doing the best job, it didn't look like it mattered at all. It was seamless. But for the teams that lost, it was always about the baton. It's my first bad handoff in business. I call it the give me that handoff. These are handoffs that I've experienced personally or personally seen with my own eyes as a part of Mega Group or as a part of Dale Carnegie Instruction. So the first handoff, the give me that handoff, it happens when the current generation is running with their baton, with all of their might. The next generation is waiting to receive the baton. The baton is grabbed by both, and they forget about their momentum, they forget about their goal, and they just start fighting over the baton. And you've seen that, right? It's just give it to me. Give it to me. And we see that so often where the current generation, the person who's in the position today, doesn't want to give up control to the next generation, and the next generation doesn't want to honor what's been done in the past generation. And so it just turns into a power struggle. That is my personal experience in family business. My grandfather was a man who was a hardcore retailer. As a matter of fact, he was so hardcore as a retailer, he never took a vacation day, except one that I know of. It was a Saturday. We were closed on Sundays. Saturday was the day we did business. The reason he took off that day is because I was getting married. And he was really, really unhappy that I picked Saturday. Now, my response was, dude, look, the only way I can get married is if I get married on Saturday, because she said we're getting married on Saturday, so we're getting married on Saturday, right? So I'm not going to be here. So both of us had to take off work. At this point, I was in transition, only a few months away from taking over the business. He reluctantly drove to Richmond, Virginia, not thrilled to be taking off, attended the wedding, and promptly got back home. I left from that wedding, went on my honeymoon, came back a week later, received my paycheck, and it was short, $437 short. And I said, Granddad, I don't know if you noticed, maybe you made a little mistake, but my check's short. And he said, I know. When I was gone last Saturday, we lost a check. Guess how much it was for? $437. If I would have been here, wouldn't have lost a check. So guess who gets paid for it? So that's sort of just how my grandfather rolled. So here I am. I've just spent all of my money on my honeymoon, all of it, and I come back home and I need that check, and I'm short. That's how my grandfather was. Now, he was hardened retail. He was a bootstraps kind of a guy. And I was coming out of college. He believed that the internet was a sort of a fad, and I believed that the internet was everything the future held, right? So we had this big gap, and we weren't willing to give up control either way, and so we ended up with sort of a give me that mentality about the future of the company. Instead of making agreements and concessions, we decided that our ways were right, ultimately ruining our momentum. The 39-year-old company. The next handoff is the entitlement handoff. This handoff is a little bit of my story as well, because this handoff happens way too often with my generation. This is the handoff where the current generation is running with all their might, and they need to hand this thing off. They need the momentum to stay in their company. They need the company to continue to thrive. While they're running, the next generation is not doing their job. Because when you are in a relay race, you start running before you get the baton. With all your might. With everything you have, you're running. And when the runner gets to you and catches you, you're in perfect stride with each other. And they make a verbal cue. You never look back. You grab the baton with your hand, and in the same motion, you continue momentum. But the entitlement handoff doesn't look that way. The entitlement handoff is when the current generation is running with all their might, with their momentum, and the next generation is standing there saying, hurry up, is it my turn yet? Can I do this? I've got better ideas. I've got other stuff, right? Hurry up, go faster. And so what happens is they end up getting the baton, and they have no freaking idea what to do with it. Because they did not follow the momentum that had been set before them, and so they don't even know which direction they should go next. That's the entitlement handoff. The next one is the disrespect handoff. This one happens all too often. The disrespect handoff happens when the current generation is running, and they're getting ready to make the handoff, and instead of making the handoff, they just turn and throw the baton. Right? Like, I'm over it. I don't want you to be successful because without me, this company should not be successful. You guys have seen that, right? You've met that family? That also happens now. Don't let me just pick on the current generation. That also happens when the next generation is particularly entitled. They may take it, and instead of just making a decision or going with the momentum, they just throw it. I'm over it. I deserve this. Right? We've seen that too. The next one is the white knuckle. You can probably guess what that one is. That one is where current generation is running, next generation turns, they're running, they are in step with all of the momentum. They're going the right direction. They're headed toward the goals that the company has set out. The handoff is made. The next generation grabs the baton and goes to take off in their stride, and guess who's still holding on? And holding on. And holding on. And killing the momentum. The next one is the handoff that didn't. Because I think this is the one that happens more than any other. The handoff that didn't is the handoff where the current generation runs so hard, so fast, for so long, and no one is prepped to take the baton, that they're not able to ever get to the handoff at all. Either because they thought they could run further than they actually could, or because the next generation wasn't able to take responsibility and accountability for their role in the momentum of the company. You see, when you're on a relay team, you don't have to be holding the baton to be important to the race. Because the first runner is just as important as the last, and they are all relying on each other to do their job, their responsibility, and to be accountable to that, and not to worry about the guy behind them or the guy in front of them, but to do their work. At Dale Carnegie Training, we call it the 3 E's. We call it being eager, being excited, and most importantly, earning the right either through knowledge or through experience. And I think without those 3 E's for the next generation, and without the current generation helping the next generation establish those 3 E's, you only have a 10% chance of winning in a family business. You only have a small percentage of a chance that your division in your larger company, the larger companies here, you only have a small percentage of a chance that you're going to make it.